I welcome you today to what I can't decide whether to call this a day of visual or aesthetic whiplash, because we're going to see very different things. And in fact, I'm starting with a picture of an artist by an artist that, although she belongs to this era and painted in this era, she's one of those like, no, not going to talk about her. She'll have to wait till we do a class on women artists. But this is Alice Neel and her portrait of two of the Sawyer brothers, because I promised last time that I would say something about the Sawyers. This was done much after the 30s, but just so that you should get a picture of them.
Oh.
Actually, this is two of the three who are artists. And I don't know which two they are because there are twins, Moses and Raphael, born in 1899. And then they have a younger brother, Israel, born in 1901 or 1902. They were born in southern Russia, and they're part of that wave of immigration into this country in the teens, early teens. Their father had been a scholar, and he encouraged his kids' interest in the arts. So I'll show just a little by all three of them. Starting with Moses. Now here, this is not you don't get to see Moses very much at all, but this is Moses in his environment, and this tells you right away what kind of artist he is. He's a traditional artist. He is, the Sawyers are, I would say, I don't know who got in on the, I thought they were all muted, but anyway, the one who's the, these are the most traditional of the artists we'll look at. And what I wanted you to see about this, not only is he traditional in the choice of subject, a female half nude here, but portraits of women, I would say, are numerically probably his most popular subject. But look at what a modest environment in which he's painting. This looks maybe like a studio, maybe his house. And you're going to see that head, a prop he has here in just a moment. He studied at the National Academy, Cooper Hewitt, here and there in the city. And his interest always was in realism. All three of the boys are committed to showing the world they saw around them in quite a traditional way. Actually, one thing Moses said, the kind of slant on the way they saw the world was, he said, paint America, but with your eyes open. Do not glorify Main Street. Paint it as it is, mean, dirty, avaricious. So this is a very different world he's seeing than Norman Rockwell would have you think is the American world. This is one of his, it's just called Old Man. And believe it or not, this is before the onset of the Depression. So this quality of being weather-beaten, worn down, and especially this kind of brooding, pensive look that you make by arching the eyebrows and then making the heavy upper lids. But total focus on the figure, nothing on the setting, quite freely painted. These will be characteristics. And now this is, so you know, this is not by him. This is by that Alice Neel who did the portrait of him. Just to give you a sense of the different interpretations presented to us of the workers. So this is Alice Neel doing one of a man who was actually pretty active on the docks. He was a labor organizer named Pat Whalen. And this is just the anonymous old man. But that's a kind of a character study. And this is an individual. So we're back to Moses and his figures. This one is a painting that's at the Jewish Museum. It's just called The Book Lover. And now you know why I had you look at the shelves behind him. There's that head. So he's brought his prop down. Maybe this was done in that same studio. But again, the man, arched brows, slightly worn, loving his heavy books, with books behind him. You're looking at him and slightly down. Again, a type. The scholar type, like his father. Well, Moses was also employed in the WPA program, in the mural painting program. And he did this painting, it's a painting by him, it's called the Mural Workshop, WPA Workshop. And I believe this is supposed to be himself. And these are murals that he was doing. And this is give a sense of the kind of camaraderie and assistant artists. I think this is one of his assistants back here, and the work being turned out, and just the kind of casual, semi-bohemian life of the artist. This is a little bit more faux awkward in the way it's painted, and a little bit more the way Ben Shahn would in this shift in scale of figures from one to the other. But it's to give you more of the environment of what it was like. Frankly, I cannot find online very many images by any of the Sawyer brothers, and not in good color and good resolution, and not much information, which lets you know that now they are not popular. So I believe this woman back here in this scene is this, which I know is one of, I was able to find 2 of the murals he did for the WPA, which was having murals sometimes as large canvases, not necessarily painted on the wall, but these large paintings were shipped all over the country, so that people who otherwise had no exposure to what would be considered art in quotation marks had an exposure, and they also were able to get art lessons and just become more conversant with what was going on. And this is called Children at Play, #1. It's now just owned by the General Services Administration, so the government has taken it back from wherever it was. Who knows where that was? But it has the quality of an illustration in a children's book, doesn't it? It's a very lovely escaping scene, and I wonder if it was for some Y or some settlement house or some generally public organization of that sort. This is the companion panel of Children at Work and Play, #2. But this is more characteristic of what he did not only in the 30s, but then throughout the rest of his career as well. This is just women and children standing. There's all 3 brothers use this type. There's sort of fragile women, sort of a melancholy quality, fairly static. The focus is only on the figures, no setting. We know that all the brothers talked and responded to the fact of how careworn women were, and how often also during the Depression, women who otherwise would be staying home with their children have to go out to work. But he's always interested in the female figures. So I frankly have to hold back my gut reaction to these. For me, you can too much read it all in just one glance. And I like works that I have to keep going back and working at and working at and working at. So I can see that it's very pleasing, but I want challenge too. So he did that, and then So he continued doing lots of portraits of women primarily, and you can see his interest is not in landscape, is not even in environment, but is in the figures. So he gives minimal settings for the figures. He was married to a dancer, and he does many lovely images of dancers in their, especially not in their dance, but as here, these are just called dancers in repose, which he did in the 1950s. And if you're quite familiar with Impressionist art, you look at this and possibly at this, if you're really familiar with it, you say, you sense something here. Well, this is very much derived from Degas. The asymmetrical compositions where it looks as if someone is just haphazardly cropped at one side, or sometimes we'll see from odd angles. And of course, the interest in dancers. The dancers as a physical labor. It's not just the beauty of the dance. These are working women, and they're tired, and their casual pose, and this oblique angle of that wall. This is so much like a Degas. Now I'll show you a couple by his brother, his twin, including a self-portrait of him in the 50s. So you can figure that's what Moses looked like as well. This is one he did of their parents. Lost in thought. You have the sense slightly also worn as you're looking from above down on them, and they're in the lower part of the picture. Together and in their separate mental worlds, or whatever they're picturing in their mind's eye. And then Raphael did more that explicitly responded to the conditions of the Depression than Moses did. And this is one that's just called Men at a Mission, or At the Mission, from 1934. And these are small. They're small enough to fit on your wall, 2 feet, maybe sometimes 2 by 2.5 would be a good, fairly large size for one. So when you look at this, here you have, it's very programmatic. You are to get the message. You can't avoid the message. How impoverished are these people? Not only are they down at the Mission, they're on the Bowery, but what do they have to eat? 3 pieces of bread, 4 pieces of bread, because one man has picked his up already, and cups of coffee. He's eating, thinking of something. And then look how he plays a young, sort of more vigorous figure and an older man here. So you have different types put together, and again, no setting, but it's the idea of the poverty, the despair, really the desperation more than the despair. And I don't know if this brings to you something to mind from the 19th century. It does for me. It's Van Gogh's Potato Eaters, where they're having coffee and potatoes. Worn, reflective, dark. Choosing dark colors, of course, because that's to enhance this sense of the emotional atmosphere. This one by him, I have no idea what the inner content of the title is, because the title is Reading from Right to Left. Again, men looking only inward, however wide open their eyes are. And the drab coloration and the slightly off-balanced composition. And then with the scene, we're going to see a lot of signage today. There was so much more graphic imagery, so much advertising in the 30s, and so many artists are responding to it. And you can see it here, so you get the prices of the things if they could afford them. then this is what he did also. This is his version of Office Girls. This is 1936. He's maybe ogling them, but everyone else here is in their own sphere. This one called Solitaire. It's about 2 feet across. So you know what I had to bring in for comparison with that. Hopper's New York apartment. Possibly not so different in theme. But here, you don't have to think about what the theme is. You have the grays, the blues, the way he turns his back to her, cradling his head on the bed. She's just partly dressed, slumped over, not even looking at her solitaire cards. Maybe she's thinking about what goes down next, but more likely she's thinking about something completely other. And Isaac. Here's a painting of his from the late 20s, which I only brought in because it again looks like a Degas with this oblique and angle, and the colors even are a little bit like a Degas painting. It's just a seamstress. It'd be again, the world that he would know. Or the art beauty shop. In this one, we know we had friends pose. This is a friend of theirs, and this is a friend of theirs. It's a kind of a more modern style, and certainly more colorful. So he does branch out. Here we've got the city. Look what's back here. But the work that looks most totally depression related, both in theme and in era, is this one of, and it's just called The Employment Agency from 1937. I think this is an L, right? Elevated train here. Each person lost in their individual miseries. The only thing giving it any motion at all would be maybe the visual motion of the diagonals. So the Sawyer's Brothers art is accessible, and it's sold very well, and is, I know from your comments, also still very, it has a great resonance for a lot of you. Several of the brothers were taught in art school in New York, so they had a lasting impact, and they never deviated from the style. There's Isaac had in his obituary, there was an anecdote where supposedly Jackson Pollock came up to him and said, "Why are you still painting that way? He's like, don't you see there are planes overhead? I mean, you know, this is a new age. Why don't you paint in the modern age?" And Isaac Sawyer said something to the effect, he couldn't tell him that he didn't like the modern age, but why couldn't he just go ahead and paint the way he liked? So that's what I have for him. All right, now here we go. Next jolt, we're going to get to Reginald Marsh, who is allied absolutely as another social realist, like Ben Shahn and like the Sawyer brothers. No, I'm just going to, you can just ruminate on his name while I tell you a little about him at first. What a different background, however. Reginald Marsh's parents were artists, and they were living in Paris when he was born. Do you know where he grew up? Was in Nutley. Now, I don't know Nutley well enough to know that there was a place called the Enclosure. There was an artist colony. So he grew up in that artist colony. his family was affluent because his father had been president, or at least a high official in the meatpacking industry. So Reginald Marsh went to Lawrenceville Prep School, still extremely expensive. And from there he went to Yale, where he worked as a cartoonist on their Yale humor magazine. So how is this for that difference from the Sawyer brothers in the kind of background? And that's going to, in some ways, reflect in the kind of art that he does. But Reginald Marsh started out as an illustrator, as a draftsman. And he worked for an ad agency. Remember, that's something that Hopper hated, but it suited Marsh very well. And he was also one of the very first cartoonists for the New Yorker, when the New Yorker was founded, he and Peter Arno. So he had a good sense of the wry and the ridiculous and just how to caricature. Well, he, in the 20s, went back to Paris for a year. And there he went to the Louvre and was smitten with the old masters, with the Renaissance masters. We haven't seen anybody who's looking at that yet. He was doing that, and he began to paint very seriously. He met an artist that you're not going to meet until next class, which is Thomas Hart Benton there. But Benton started showing him some technical procedures and some techniques in painting, and how to use tempera and how to combine that with his draftsmanship, and kind of coming up with a new approach in his painting. Well, so when he came back, he settled down in the Union Square area. That's where there were it was a focus for the studios of a number of artists who were considered social realists. They painted scenes on the Bowery, the very active scene at Union Square, and they could go back and forth to one another's studios. And there were a couple of dominant personalities who kind of led that. Well, Reginald Marsh, I'm going to start not with looking at his work in sort of like chronological order, but I'm going to take you to his murals, because he also, despite having no financial difficulties throughout his life, he did get some government support in the WPA. And I still have one more detour to take before we get into it. That is binding us what was last week. You're now in Detroit again. This is a mural by Diego Rivera that, were he not Mexican, he would certainly be one of the major figures we'd be talking about. This is a mural he did just called Detroit Industry. And the industry that he presents in these murals, which he's doing at the same time he's doing the one in Rockefeller Center, is for the River Rouge Ford plant. And at the time in 1932, when he started working on this, that's the time when Sheeler did his paintings of the River Rouge plant. That is the time when there was an infamous hunger strike of workers who'd been laid off from that plant, who marched out from Detroit to the plant, wanted to win back employment. And the panicky guards at the plant shot into the crowd and killed 6 of them. So it was a devastating event. But what Rivera did was then hire some of those men who were not re-employed at the River Rouge plant and had them help him do this mural. And what this mural shows is that factory making what was the new Model A of that year. So I'm going to just show you parts of this scene over here. On this wall, it's all about building the engines. And on the wall that you can't see over here, it's about building the chassis of the car. And I would suspect, if Rivera is doing what he often does, many of these were portraits of the people he knew, people who worked there. These are men heaving and straining, pushing the cart of the weight of one of these engine blocks on here. they're simplified, but look how muscular these men are. And then played off against all of this, you have the conveyor belts and the parts coming down along here, and the color immediately gets dimmer and the background gets, let's see, it's still full of detail, but it doesn't command attention the way the figures who are down at our level do. Okay, so I showed you that so that you're ready for a mural by Reginald Marsh, which certainly shows his awareness of what Diego Rivera has done. These are ones that, this is called Sorting the Mail. He did these in the mid-1930s. They're in Washington, D.C. They're in the building that's now the headquarters of the EPA. And it was just showing everything related to the mail. I'll show you 2 panels from it. So you have this background action in more muted color. I'm actually showing you these in reverse order. We're going to see sorting the mail, and then after that, we'll get to unloading the mail. And the mail is coming down here. But I want you to just kind of notice something about the way he does these undoubtedly heroic, muscular figures. Well, do you know where the muscles like that come from? That's not from a worker. That's from Michelangelo. And he has a very strong sense of making this like art. Because look how those shapes of those arms, these muscles are repeated in the shapes of the mail bags. So this kind of form. And it's kind of like the men don't separate one out from the other so neatly as they do in Rivera's. But what do we have here instead? A great triangle. We have this man and his adoration of Renaissance and high Renaissance art being applied to workers in mail facilities here. And he too is presenting types, you know, these strong-jawed, slightly smiling faces. No sense of this is although it's hard physical labor, do you see any man here who isn't enjoying his work? No. And look, it's just lauding what they're doing. Just, it's great praise. And then here's the next one. Oh, well. So the other thing I want to say about this is like this great pile of people going back in space like this one here, or heaving and turning, and sometimes they really intertwine. His model for that is partly Tintoretto in Venice. So I just picked out a detail from a Tintoretto painting where you could see where he's getting that. And here's unloading the mail. It's going into the little boat that takes it from the liner, from the Cunard line here, and it's going to take it over here to the harbor. And the mail, oh, it's very explicit here. You see, it comes from Vienna, comes from France, from Italy, from Calcutta. So it has an underlying optimistic message, especially about New York, as being the entry point to the world, the commerce, the connections, international here in this scene. And here, this man with his ledgers keeping track of the bags that are coming in. So he made many sketches. I mean, he completely sketched the whole Cunard liner out here, and then in the end, chose this. I believe even in these frescoes have the sense of how much he is a draftsman, how line is he draws detail in line, he draws outline, everything is line. And he also did murals in what, well, I still tend to think of as the US Customs building in downtown Manhattan, now the Museum of the American Indian. And they're called the finest New Deal murals left in Manhattan. They're in the rotunda in here. And they're really awkward shape for doing murals. And they're It shows 8 different New York harbors and then 8 great navigators in these spaces in here. And there's something he wrote about this that I wanted to say, just because you get a sense of the man and also his relationship to the art of other people at that time. He wrote that he was keen as hell to get to paint them at any price. He says, I feel very proud of that the honor to paint these walls has fallen to me. It's a man-sized job with many problems, all those curves, etc. Here's a chance to paint contemporary shipping with a rich and real power, neither like the storytelling nor the propagandistic painting, which everybody does. So he may be considered one of the social realists, but he within himself is distinguishing himself from the rest of the crowd. I've had in the past painted dozens of watercolors around New York Harbor and would like to get at it with some of this knowledge. So I'll just give you 2 of them quickly here. And then some of his panel paintings. This one he gave the title, Why Not Use the L? And this is from 1930. Now, in his notebooks, he copied this text exactly with that type or handwritten here. And he also made a copy of the ad that's here. So he's liking all this kind of the visual stimulation around it. I don't know, I suppose you could probably read even the headline on the paper down here. And this he uses tempera paint, that's which Benton taught him also. So that poster color that Jacob Lawrence liked as well. But he layers that one layer on top of another and then with drawing. And the result is that the colors always, well, you can get something really brilliant like this, but it's often, it lends itself to a kind of muddiness and a kind of grimy quality, which is what he sought, because that's to reflect the atmosphere of what he's seeing. This is a very good, he does show very well here 3 completely different states of being. Tattoo and a haircut. This is a big one, it's about 4 feet high. And this is a scene down under the L, excuse me, in the Bowery. And he's copied all the signs. I should get water. And he's, I'm going to have to go get water. I'll be back. You can enjoy this. Look at the detail while I'm going. I don't know why looking at him should make me parched. But you see, he does not exactly caricature, but he's liking all these different types. This gangly man over here, somebody leaning against the pole. This man, I think, has a harmonica in his hand. And here's some woman who sort of looks a little bit concerned that she's wandered into the wrong area. This looks a little bit like a caricature here. And this guy too. And this would be a crippled derelict. But he's also playing on like the seediness of the lives of these men played off against a clean towel to every customer, a shave and a haircut, which probably many of those could not afford. 20-cent movie. The same mix of mediums, and this is on cardboard. So the movie is absolutely of the day. You remember from Hopper how much going to the movie was a solace for everybody. So you can see what the movies are playing in the movie stores, and then the women who are, I would say this one, I'm like Oh my God, how did he get away with that? You absolutely see her genitals there. The women are very buxom. They're always really sexualized, and you could say it comes from his interest in Rubens, but anyway, they are. They're often very powerful. And here's a man dressed like a dandy. And these women are dressed in the style of the starlets who are shown. So these are people who are trying to imitate the glamour that they go into the movie to escape into. And one place he loved to go was Coney Island. He would write home to his his wife, and he would say, you know, oh, so wonderful, it was so hot and sweaty there. Oh, there were just such crowds of people. It's like, oh my goodness, you want to go to that? But this one is called Smoko, the Human Volcano. So you see, here's Smoko. And there must be a contest with some mere mortal who's gonna try to do the same thing. Then you have the crowd all here down below. So in his paintings, there's stuff going on everywhere. Which is to him, that's the vibrancy of the city, the crowds, the smells, just the sounds, the whole feel of the city he wants you to get. And this is an etching he did at Coney Island. And I think if I had done some serious looking at my Renaissance examples of the Last Judgment, I'm sure this is based, well, this is certainly one of the Falling Angels from Michelangelo. I think this is a Michelangelo figure too. And this whole general scene is like this swirl of figures that are, as they're going into hell. But that has no implications like that for Marsh. This is one quite well known by him. It's called The Breadline. It's another etching. And it's called Breadline, No One Has Starved. This one bothers me. Doesn't have to bother you, just bothers me. There are many socialist realist works and photographs of breadlines. That's one of the sort of dominant visual images of the worst of the Depression. But as you look at this line of men, again, they look like types. And he's done the very opposite from the Sawyer brothers. It doesn't look to me like he identifies with any of them, except that these are picturesque characters. And also, look what he shows here, and here, and here. These are pickpockets. So I read someone, I agree this shows you poverty as a theme. It's not showing you particular individuals or the effect of poverty on people. But there's a twist in this title of it, Breadline, No One Has Starved. Herbert Hoover, in his feudal re-election campaign in '32, said just hold on here. The American economy is fundamentally sound. Have we heard this? And that no one has starved. So that's why it says, Breadline, no one has starved. But there's something else than me with my art history knowledge. Looking at this, one of his sources was Roman relief sculpture of these rows of figures. So he draws on the whole tradition of art and his knowledge of the art historical background in his works. It's a very interesting melange then, isn't it? But of a man who himself is wealthy and apart and can look at the desperate condition of his fellow men at that time and see in them the material that can be made to conform to the great art of the past. So now we're on to photographers. First start with Berenice Abbott. Let me see here in her very direct way of looking at you. She had started out as a sculpture student. She's from Ohio. She left home as soon as she could get away. And she went to, she studied a little while in this country, and then she went to Paris. Spent a lot of the 20s in Paris. Knew Marcel Duchamp, knew Man Ray, was moving in the avant-garde circles. She was studying sculpture, but she needed to support herself, so she offered to become Man Ray's studio assistant. And he was at that time just beginning to explore photography. So she learned photography along with him, and soon was doing work that certainly rivaled his, and she abandoned sculpture. And she was set up quite well in Paris as a photographer of cultural celebrities. I mean, she made really striking portraits, which, because since they're in the 20s, I'm saying you'll have to go online to go see. But in 1929, she came back to the States. And when she reached Manhattan, she was really struck by how much the city had changed in the years that she'd been away, with a great boom, as for example, the two buildings we saw, the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, being erected while she was gone. So she saw the great difference, and that also brought to her something that she was, when working with Man Ray, she'd gotten very interested in the photography of a somewhat earlier French photographer, Eugène Atget, A-T-G-E-T, who had made these wonderful photographs of Paris then and now. So he's comparing the old city and the current city. Man Ray had collected all the negatives and photographs of Atget that he would get before they were destroyed. And then Berenice Abbott brought them back to the United States. And she actually helped to make Atget's reputation. But here, I'll just give you two by him, that one and this. So it's this documenting all the different facets of his beloved city as a city, not concentrating on the people. And Berenice Abbott embarked on doing the same thing. In the middle of the 30s, her project then was supported by the government, by the WPA, but she had started that beforehand. So I have, nowhere near as many of these photographs as I would like to show you. Brought in a few. This one just is called, they're just titled by the scenes represented. This is a Blossom restaurant. Now you can link that up with the marsh you just saw, right? The signs clustered around the entrance out of the subway, the shave, the hot towels, the barber pole. This is Radio Row, looking east along Cortlandt Street toward Greenwich Street. This is 1936 there, so you see the L. So she's presenting as objective a view of this city in these photographs as is possible for her to do. And she's a marvelous photographer. She does sometimes, because they are an aspect of city life, show how difficult it was for some, as in this one of the automat. That was the most inexpensive food available, and where many of the people who were in desperate times went to get something. So this is an automat on East 8th Street. Look how she goes for that sense of implied dynamism, that suggestion, this dynamic lines. I tell you, the industrial designers were more explicit about it, but they were all to carry an underlying message of speed and motion, that we will get through this, we are speeding through this, we are moving towards something good. We are not caught in what's going on now. So I'll show you two that she took from this location. It's very dispassionately identified by her as the huts and the unemployed, West Houston and Mercer Streets. There are shanties. That's the same for this. You see, she's just moved slightly. The central shanty is this one is someone who has a love of art. So here are Sawyer's worn men. This is quite a famous photograph by her that she did slightly earlier. It's called A Night View. This is 1932. She was daring. She took this from the top of the Empire State Building, hanging over the railing and looking down to get this aerial view. Isn't it marvelous? Then I'll give you some that are more about this contrast of the old and the new. This is Broad Street looking toward, Manhattan Sky Lane, South Street, and Jones Lane. So you have the old buildings of the sort that would appeal to Hopper, still down here. This building still exists. Of course, some of these, what's that? Is that the MetLife skyscraper, I think, there? So you have this vestige of the old city. These great spires rising over it. This is out on a pier. You can see this is the East River here. It's very effective to give you that long distance to walk into it so that you see that whole panorama. Now this is Broad Street looking toward Wall Street. These famous canyons, skyscraper canyons. And this is the Daily News building, which was new, and this is the most modern architecture by Raymond Hood. It's of the era of the Rockefeller Center building. You can see over here, this would be the Hudson here. And she's quite famous for making dramatic views. They are in sort of casual art historical parlance called worm's eye views and bird's eye views. And this is a worm's eye view when you're looking, hardly a worm in the city, but looking up at the view. And so this is the Murray Hill Hotel. We have the 19th century tracery and sculptural embellishment against the sleek modernity here. She does the same theme here. This is the Elwin Court building, which is on East, I think maybe it's West 58th Street, which is just dripping in late French 19th century empire decoration. The plane over here. This is another one of hers I think is quite well known. This is the 2nd and 3rd Avenue lines. This is the L pattern here. And the last two I brought in for her, Penn Station. Next one, Margaret Burke White. Known as Maggie the Indestructible, I guess, to people. She came from a family that was achievers. Her father was an engineer and an inventor, and he had a passion for cameras. She absorbed that passion. She went to college to study herpetology. I don't know if she's going to do reptiles or snakes, but she then switched to photography. And as soon as she graduated, I should say, she went to Plainfield High School. So she also had some local background. And after she graduated from college, she went out to Ohio and set up her own photo studio. You could see the kind of sense of assertion she presents there. At that photo studio, she was not interested in doing portraiture, the sort of the conventional thing, you know, weddings and babies and people's houses. She was interested in industrial settings and in work for architectural firms. Essentially the same thing that Sheeler had been interested in. But she takes it someplace else. She importuned, she begged the Otis Steel Company to let her come in and show the industry at work. And here she does. This is a 200-ton steel ladle. And evidently this was a huge technical challenge because the film didn't react to the reds and golds. And she had to come up with some kind of technical workaround to be able to do it, to get this shot. So she does that, and then she also does some advertising photography. This is also 1930. A Coke dispenser, do you see there those 3 lines? That modern style, what we saw in the Rizzo City Music Hall. There it is. Very polished style. And she would do anything. Do you know where she is there? I'm figuring somebody did. She's on the Chrysler building. She's up on one of the gargoyles on the Chrysler. What kind of crazy person stands on the gargoyle? Of course, who's the crazy person taking the photograph that you can even see this? But she's looking down at the city. And here's her photo of the spire of it. So she's drawn to the real visual quality. This is very much an artistic photograph. And one was from almost, well, this is 1939, but I sure wonder how she got this one. It has to be the Empire State Building, right? This has to be, no, I don't know. Anyways, looking down here to DC 4E over Manhattan. Before showing you more pictures she did in the 30s, I will tell you, 1930s, she was the first person from this country allowed into the Soviet Union to photograph industry. She was the first combat photographer. She was in North Africa and Italy. She was one of the first people into Buchenwald. She was intrepid. And I guess not always easy to get along with, but just photojournalist of the premier quality. This is one work I thought maybe some people would be familiar with from hers. It's the building of a dam in Montana at Fort Peck, so damming up the Missouri River, and this is one of the government projects. And this particular photograph is particularly famous because in this area, once the photograph was taken, was put the masthead of the Life magazine. This was used as the cover of the very first issue of Life magazine in 1936. You see what she's done to emphasize the power and the grandeur and the scale is just to include 2 engineers down here. And then within that issue, there was a whole photo essay on the building of this dam. Luce hired her as a photojournalist for the magazine. This is one of the ones she did. This is where water would be sent through here while it was, the dam was under construction. Again, she shows a few people in here. But then look at this. This is the local bar. So she showed the life of the people around there. It wasn't just the magnificence and the power of that man-made structure. A lot of people got agitated about this kid sitting on a bar. So in the mid-30s, at the beginning of the drought, she was sent out to photograph people suffering from the drought. Here's one people who borrowed a sharpening a knife. Here's another one. Children sleeping outside. And this one, I'm a little setting this up for next time too. This is a photograph she did in the mid-30s of these two Southern farmers. This was for a project that she took on with Erskine Caldwell, whom she later married briefly. They produced a book called You Have Seen Their Faces. Caldwell had published the book Tobacco Row, and kind of a bad press for his negative view about Southerners. Now, he was a Southerner himself. So the objective was to present a more sympathetic portrayal of people there. And so she went with him and they photographed figures. And then the two authors of this book wrote the captions. And they wrote captions that expressed what they thought these people might have been thinking. So it's not honest, it's not authentic, but it was, whatever they said was what the readership could understand and appreciate, and the book was tremendously successful. And these pictures kind of fit with the visual culture that this is what people in distress ought to look like. So although she's not mainly a photographer of, in that sense, of social realism, she played this really important role with this book. And two, well, where she was sent down by Life magazine on assignment. And in Louisville in 1937, there was a terrible flood. And one whole area of the city was flooded out. So she went down to photograph the after effects. And so here we have, I'll show you two photographs. Well, I have three more photographs of hers to show you, but this one, these are people in essentially a bread line. And look at how what's here. World's highest standard of living. There's nothing like, I can't myself see, there's no way like the American way in this jolly, happy, Rockwell-esque white family. So she's very alert to the injustice in this. And she does this one of people in the shelter. She makes it as dynamic with these diagonals. It's as carefully arranged. This look at that look, this look toward us. It's a marvelous photograph, isn't it? No squalor. These are people of dignity here. Also, it looks like life is easy in a shelter, and we know that can't be true. The last one she did, that we're looking at, I'm bringing in, because this is one I want to give you the caption she wrote for it. Life magazine did not publish it. So she's photographing the world she sees in the South. And this is called, so I'm just finishing with what she said, for colored. Sign atop Coca-Cola sign, tacked to a wooden Star of David, in front of a Booker T. Washington store, effecting a cruel display of racist condescension in the land of segregation. Location, Elkridge, Maryland, US, date taken, 1938. See, she seldom allowed her photographs to give voice to that. But where we start next time with Walker Evans, we'll have plenty of that. So next time it'll be Walker Evans, Dorothea Lange, and a speed through Thomas Hart Benton and Grant Woods. So fasten your seatbelts again. And that's it, although of course I'll stay on for questions. Any questions I love.
Maggie, a friend, it's Josie. A
Yeah.
friend gave me a beautiful book.
Thank you, Maggie.
Sure.
It's a novel by Isaac Singer called Lost in America. And its illustrations are by Raphael Sawyer. Mostly charcoal sketches. I don't know if you've ever seen this book.
No. So that would be very nice if sometime in the day.
When we can go back outside.
Hit that.
I'll be happy to share it with you.
Okay, thank you.
Show, except instead of ending up paying attention in a big fancy studio, he's doing it outside.
I want to get out of this. I don't know. We'll just have to have, while I'm, okay. Aha, here I am. I just have to sync. Okay. Now
Thank you, Maggie.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful.
Are you going to take questions from the chat? Because there are a few.
Yeah, I'll take anything.
Could you just?
Yes, George Siegel did take something from that.
Okay.
I don't want
Yeah, we will get to Ben.
George Staples.
Any other question here?
Please don't do that.
Yes, there is class next week, and oh boy, I wish there were more.
What was the name of the book that she did with Erskine Caldwell?
It's called You Have Seen Their Faces.
Okay, thank you.
You know, next time when we do Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, the photographs from that too, the later interviews with the people that they photographed felt very much that they had been condescended to.
You can clap. You can give it a thumbs up.
Hi, guys.
Don't worry, I asked you.
Anything more? Any more questions? No?
Wow, that was something.
Well, I have to say then,
Thank you.
for next week.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye, goodbye.